Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Tiny House Summit. Kerri Fivecoat Campbell is. Kerri, welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
Super glad to have you here. Thanks to a good cell phone internet connection that is making this possible.
Yeah, I'm glad I have AT&T and had a grandfather unlimited data plan.
Shout out to those of us who maintained those grandfathered plans. Hey, so I met you at the Jamboree, I think, where I bought a copy of your book, Living Large in Our Little House, Thriving in 480 Square Feet with 6 dogs, a husband, and 1 remote. The book must have just come out when I met you.
Yeah, it came out June 17th of last year.
So I'm sure that was a huge deal in and of itself, but tell that story, the book story, as well as telling the story just of you.
Okay. Well, I'll start with when we moved here back in 2007. We built this house in 2003, and we intended it to be a vacation home. And then later on, we were going to retire here and build a bigger house, probably about 1,000 square feet, and have the tiny house be my office and a guest house. And when we got down here in 2007, we're in a very rural area in Arkansas. My husband found a really good job with a boat manufacturer, a large boat manufacturer down here. And so we thought we were all set. He didn't get down here until October of 2007. And we decided to wait after we got a few bids on building another house. We decided to wait until the spring and see what the spring brought. And then we started getting more bids in the spring about building a bigger house. And we decided that we didn't want that big mortgage anymore. And, we were getting later in life. And so we didn't want to go 20 or 30 years with another big mortgage. So we had lived out the winter in our tiny house. And although it was cramped because we hadn't planned on having that as our full-time residence, we figured we could probably do it as long as I had a separate office space. So we tried one last ditch effort to get a bid on building onto the house, but that would cost more than building another house almost per square foot. So we just decided to go ahead and build an office for me. And my husband already had a big garage, so he was happy with that. So we started construction on the office, and that fall, exactly 13 months after my husband got his job down here, he was laid off because of the recession. And so we were very glad that we didn't, go into big debt again with the bigger house. So so the recession was pretty hard on us. He spent about 18 months on unemployment and then working for minimum wage, two jobs, and my business, which was a writing business based in the newspaper industry, was kind of crashing down too because the newspapers were all in financial distress. So in 2009, my husband was getting ready to be called back to his job, and I realized how significant our lifestyle had changed being in a tiny house. So I started the blog Living Large in Our Little House, found Kent Griswold online. There weren't many blogs at that point. Kent's was probably the biggest one. And there weren't, as far as he knows and as far as I know, any other lifestyle blogs about living the life. And so I started blogging about actual lifestyle and the changes that we had made. And so that's how Living Large in Our Little House got started. I think the next year because I'm a writer, I went to a writers conference, one of the biggest ones in New York City, and met my agent, and she was very interested in the book. And so it took me a couple of years to decide what I wanted to do with the book, and really felt like the story had really developed. But Reader's Digest bought the manuscript, they bought the idea, and they decided they not only wanted my story, they wanted me to include stories of other people. So the book has about stories about 10 other people in it that have went tiny. So I was real excited last year when it came out in June, and was very happy to get to the Tiny House Jamboree in Colorado in August.
So it's probably not a surprise to you that the largest demographic signing up for the summit are middle-aged women.
No, actually, I find on my Facebook page, Living Large in Our Little House, which has about 63,000 members, that's my biggest demographic too. So I think that I think it's a lifestyle that, you know, whether you're married or single or divorced or you know, widowed, I think it's a lifestyle that people, women my age, 50 plus, are real interested in.
So I'm also really interested that you've kind of answered one question that people give a lot, which is, what if you have a lot of books or an office or a workspace? So are you actually in your office now?
I'm in my office now. It's 320 square feet. It's a separate building because there was just no way. We perched our cabin on the side of a mountain down here in the Ozark Mountains, so there just wasn't any way to add on to it that was economical and that made sense, that didn't take away from the charm of our house. So my office is a little bit up the driveway, and we needed a storm shelter anyway. There's lots of tornadoes here in the Midwest, of course. So we built a basement underneath that's a reinforced storm shelter as well. And so yeah, I love it that I have a separate space for my office. Working in my house for that winter, well, it was actually a year before the office was complete. We had moved in the year before, and working in that 10 by 10 space that was also doubling as our bedroom, I compare it to working from an airplane seat every day. It was just really, really cramped. And so, yeah, when you're a writer and you have lots of papers and you have lots of books, it's you really need your own space.
Yeah, I have this vision of instead of building a larger family home, you build like 4 small homes. And then when your kids come to visit, they get to stay in separate homes. But when they're not there, you can Airbnb them.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great idea. I've actually thought about renting out my office, but I can't do that until I'm able to retire because I need it every day. So
That is really fun. Okay, so we're going to talk today. You're going to talk today about becoming one with your tiny kitchen. And we think that there's actually a good number of people who will have this question about cooking in tiny houses.
yeah, you know, my husband and I are we are dinks. We're double income, no children. We didn't have any biological children. We did have 2 exchange daughters live with us for a year each. But other than that, we basically went out to eat all the time. Our lives were in the city, and our bigger house was really rushed. And although I had a great big country kitchen, I didn't do a whole lot of cooking because it was just so easy just to run down the street or, you know, stop and get something for my husband on the way home from work or whatever. So I think that, you know, even if people had big families or had children and they're transitioning to this lifestyle, especially, you know, 50 and older, you might have done some cooking in your house, but I imagine a lot of people were like me and my husband, and we just ate out quite often. When we moved out here to our tiny little house, for one, we can't do that because there's 2 restaurants in our little town, and they're not very good. So we only eat there. We only stop and eat or grab something to bring home if I'm really, really rushed for time. And then, you know, it's just not practical for us to go out to eat anymore. So, and it's not healthy either. So I had to become one with my kitchen. When we moved here, I like to tell the story that I didn't even know what a garlic clove was. I had done that little of cooking. So, and anytime I cooked and did use garlic, it was the dried garlic in the jar.
I think there's a deeper theme here, right? Because it's not just cooking. I think gardening comes to mind as well, or hobby pursuits. There's this whole set of activities that, in the rush of kind of regular consumer living, we think, "Oh, I'd like to do that, but I don't have time, and maybe I'm not even capable of it." Did you go through any of that?
Sure did. Now gardening, I used to do a lot of gardening in my suburban house because I was brought up with a garden. So, and I love, fresh tomatoes and fresh cucumbers and everything, except that our yard was really small. And so when we had one large tree in our yard. And so when that got so big that it shaded the entire yard, I couldn't garden anymore because my yard wasn't getting any sun. Down here, we have the problem of we either have to have raised beds because we're on the side of a rocky mountain, or do container gardening. And my husband works so many hours right now that we haven't done any raised beds yet, but I do container gardening every year. I grow cilantro and tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, and I tried tomatillos last year. Didn't have too much luck with that, though.
But you're an accomplished person. You're a professional. Um, did you face any sort of a personal emotional hurdles in learning something like building the house or cooking? Did you have to overcome any fears?
I did have a fear of cooking because, I'd been married more than 20 years by the time we had moved down here. But like I said, I didn't engage in a lot of cooking. I was a midlife baby. My mom was and dad were in their 40s when they had me. And so my mom and dad actually had a family before they had me. I say because my siblings were so much older than me, 11, 15, and 17 years. So by the time I came along, my mom and dad were really ready to pursue their own type of things, And so my mom thought that prepared and boxed foods were just, and frozen foods were the greatest thing. She would cook meals on the weekends. We would have pot roast or meatloaf or whatever, but my dad was still working two jobs. And so during the week, it was just her and I, and we would have, canned chow mein noodles and jarred spaghetti sauce. So that's really what I was brought up on. And so I didn't really learn how to cook from scratch. So it was very intimidating to me. My husband likes to tell people about the time that I cooked my first meatloaf, and he calls it a big lump of baked spaghetti or baked hamburger because it was not tasty at all. I didn't know what spices to put into it. And it can be very intimidating. When I got down here, like I told you, I didn't even know what a garlic clove was. And so when I went to a kitchen party with one of the neighbors that one of the neighbors had, and looked at this garlic press, I was like, well, what are you supposed to do with this? I mean, I didn't even know what to do with a garlic press. So it was very intimidating. And after I got down here and had some blood pressure problems, of course, some of that probably was due to the angst we were having over the job situation and the recession. But, the doctor told me, you really need to get off processed foods and quit eating all that salt and stuff. And so that's when I kind of had to pick up a cookbook, figure out what a garlic clove was, a garlic clove versus a garlic bulb, and make stuff from scratch. And really, now I find making things from scratch a lot easier than, picking up the boxes of tuna or hamburger helper.
There is this thread of necessity that runs through a lot of the stories of scaling down or tiny house living. We didn't have a choice, or we needed to do this, or we found ourselves in this precarious financial situation. And it does seem as though that necessity reminds us that we are capable of doing things that otherwise we sort of felt like we weren't capable of doing.
Oh, absolutely. Now, when we were down here about a little over a year, just after my husband got laid off, we had a terrible ice storm. The ice storm hit us, and then it marched on toward the East Coast and left I think about 3 million people without power that for weeks on end. We didn't have power down here for 10 days. And so I had to learn how to cook actually on our wood stove. We had ran out of propane. We had a propane camp stove, but we ran out of propane. Of course, we couldn't get to the store for the first few days, and so I had to learn how to cook on a wood stove. And so when you cook on a wood stove, you can do just about anything. But it does teach you, how industrious we can be, and how not self-reliant we really are anymore.
Yeah, that theme keeps coming out in the interviews, and it seems like it's kind of the downside to specialized economy. The specialized economy provides us with all kinds of luxuries that otherwise would be hard to afford. But the cost of that often is feeling disempowered in our own ability to provide for ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. We've done all kinds of things down here that we didn't think that we would ever do. We heat with our wood stove in the wintertime. So we have to keep a firewood, and you have to think ahead because you just can't put green firewood in your stove, or you're going to have the problem like we had this just before Christmas when we had a flue fire because we put green wood in it last year because we couldn't get our supplier didn't have enough, and we didn't take the initiative to go find it. So you have to kind of keep your eye open and keep your wood stock ahead. And we don't have out here in the country. We don't have people picking up our trash, so we have to take it into the transfer station. So it makes you more aware of how much trash you're producing, not only because you don't have the room to store it, but because there's nobody picking up your trash. We don't have sewer services out here, so you have to be cognizant of what you put into your sewer lines, because it goes into your septic tank. And of course, if you put things that in your septic tank that aren't good, you're going to have a big old problem in your house. And it just makes you think about living. And when you're in the city, like you said, you just don't think about that anymore. We have so many conveniences in the city.
So you must run into people who are same age, same life circumstance previously, who say, how do you possibly do it? What are they most surprised by?
Well, I think they're most surprised by the fact that my husband and I live in such close quarters and we haven't killed each other in 10 years. But, and I tell people with the relationship thing, you really, really have to like the person. And because you're living in such tight quarters, and, there are things that you can't unsee, like when your other partner gets sick or whatever. I think that's most surprising to people. And people say to me, well, I could do it if it was just me. They don't think that they could do it with their partner or whatever. But I think that another theme that I have found with people who live in tiny houses is that most of us are outdoors people anyway. We live on a lake, one of the biggest bass fishing lakes in the Midwest, and we have a boat. And like yesterday and Saturday it was 80 degrees here. And so we were outside most of the day. Yesterday was, a little cooler. I think it was in the 60s, but we went and took a hike. When the weather's good, we're not sitting around the house. And like I said, my husband has a garage that he can retreat to, and I've got my office that I can retreat to. So.
Yeah, you almost completed my vision. You've got 3 of the 4 buildings, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, we call it Campbelltown. We made our driveway. We put the cabin at the very end of a long winding driveway. So when you pull in, you've got the building that we store the boat in, and then on the left-hand side you've got my office, and on the right-hand side you've got the garage, and then finally you're at the house. So we've got 4 buildings.
Nice. Now, the garage and the office, do they have plumbing?
The office does. We put a full bath in the office because I didn't want to, every time I had to go to the bathroom, first of all, during the day, I didn't want to have to run back home because I am up the driveway a little bit, and for our guests, because this is where our guests stay when they come down.
Now, did you contract someone to build the house? What was your build process?
Oh, we contracted to build the house. My aunt and her husband live down the road from us, And so he acted kind of as the project manager. We had a great contractor. The contractor that actually built their house built our house. And so, but still, it was quite a challenge because we were 300 miles away. For example, we told my aunt's husband that we wanted the house facing the road. And so we came down the next weekend all excited because we knew the foundation had been laid that week. And we pulled up to the house, and my husband said, "The house is facing the wrong way." And I said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Yes," because, you know, all that was up was the foundation and the studs. He said, "Yes, it's facing the wrong way." And so, so instead of the house facing the driveway, it actually faces the woods. But it was going to be too costly for us to redo the foundation at that point. And our contractor said, you know, because he didn't have cell phone service out here, and he was like, well, when he told me that, I was, he said, because usually you want your back deck facing the lake, and which is actually how we had it planned out. He said, so when he told me to face it toward the road, I was like, oh, I don't know if they want that. He said, but I couldn't call you because I didn't have cell phone service. So we ended up with our house facing the woods, which is okay. So when you drive up to our house, instead of seeing the front of the house, you see the back of the house.
I'm sure everybody has stories like that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody, you know, even when we did the office, I was like, okay, now we're going to be able to do everything to the office that we that we didn't get right with the house. And, you know, there's still a few things like putting floodlights on the back. I don't know why we didn't do that. We didn't do it on the house, and we were sorry we didn't. And then I don't know why we didn't think of doing it on the office, but we didn't do it on the office either. But my office is great. It has the other thing we didn't do in the house that I wish we would have done was to had raised ceilings, because when you have a tiny space like that, of course, when you raise your ceilings, it's going to make it feel bigger. And so my 320 square foot office, we put cathedral ceilings in here with beams, and it's beautiful, and it feels actually a lot more spacious than the house.
Yeah, the portion that we can see looks spacious. Well, spacious enough to have, you know, a big comfy chair.
Yes. Yeah, always got to have a comfy chair when especially when you're going to be sitting in it for 10 to 12 hours a day.
So tell me about so when you had the house built, then you had the kitchen built, and where were you in your own personal stage of thinking about cooking then? How was the kitchen good enough for you once you started cooking?
Well, my husband did a lot of outdoor cooking. He's still into cast iron cooking, and he does a lot of grilling. So, but I even knew then, even though I wasn't a great chef in the kitchen yet, I even knew then that we were too far away. You know, if we came down here for the weekends, or even if we came down here for a week, we didn't want to be out running around trying to drive an hour to get to a restaurant. So we built the kitchen full-sized. We made sure that it had everything that we would need to live in it for a week or two at a time, or permanently if we had to. And so I put in as much cabinet space cabinets as I could, and as much counter space as I could. We didn't put in a dishwasher for that very reason, because that would take up a whole bunch of cabinets. So I've got a full-size kitchen with full-size appliances. We don't have a microwave, and I don't miss it, simply because I didn't want to have that taking up the counter space. So.
And have you made any choices since to reconfigure, or do you give advice to people who are thinking about building small, who care about cooking?
Right. Yeah. I advise everybody, if they can, if their house isn't going to be really, really small, you know, 480 square feet's double the size of some of the tiny houses. So if their house isn't going to be really small, to put in full-size appliances if they can, especially if they're going to be out in a rural area. We have a smaller refrigerator. I mean, it's smaller than a lot of people's normal size refrigerators. And I still find myself, because we stock up on groceries for 1 to 2 weeks at a time, depending on how far we're going to have to look for groceries that week. I still find myself needing more refrigerator space. And so sometimes we store stuff out we have a refrigerator out in the garage that was our beer refrigerator when we used this as our weekend place, but now it's stocked mostly with groceries and meat.
Is there anything that you really miss that you had in a larger home kitchen?
Not really. You know, a lot of people I think would probably miss their space, but it's kind of hard for me to explain. But I had a big country kitchen that was from end to end. My refrigerator was on one end, and my stove and cooking was on the other end. And then kind of in the middle was the sink, and on either side of the sink you could, you know, use for chopping up vegetables and things like that. And so if I was preparing a large meal for, say, holidays or whatnot, I just found it very inconvenient having that big of a space to work with. I would find myself running from end to end, you know, getting stuff out of the refrigerator and then having to go back over to the stove. I don't have that in my smaller space. And because I designed this house, for example, we put a Lazy Susan in the corner cabinet, the lower corner cabinet by the stove and oven. In my bigger house, there was a corner cabinet, but it just went way, way back into the cabinet. We were digging things out of there that I hadn't seen since we moved in, you know. It went so far back into there. It would have been more convenient to have a Lazy Susan. And then here also I put in a baker sheet cabinet, which is a kind of a skinnier, taller cabinet where your baking sheets fit. So I think that was a good choice here too, and would advise anybody to do that. I guess if I missed anything, it would be a lot of cabinet space. We don't have a lot of cabinet space here, although I utilized as much as I possibly could. Most of the real estate in the house is taken up by the kitchen, actually. So the cabinet space I do miss, but it just makes you have to go through your stuff. And, you know, we have a one in, one out policy, whether it's the closet, the pantry, or the cabinets. If we buy something, something has to go out so we don't get cluttered.
Oh, that's clever. Okay, so what about chores? How do you and your husband manage chores?
Well, I do most of the cooking, which some days I like and some days I don't. So I will either, like yesterday when we were both home, I will get up and prep stuff for dinner and then let him go into the kitchen after I've prepped, cutting up vegetables or whatever it might be, and let him cook brunch. In the evenings, he washes off the dishes, and I wash those in the morning, give him a full wash in the morning, but they're always washed off at night. We really can't, I guess if there's another thing that I miss is that when we did cook at home in Kansas City, we could be in the kitchen at the same time, and that's just, it's not possible here. We like each other, but we don't like each other that much.
You're kind of remote, but do you entertain?
We do, actually. We have a deck that's half the size of our house. And so it typically has to be a nice day, of course. But even if it's hot, we set fans out on the deck. And if we entertain, it's my husband that's usually cooking, and he's usually either grilling or doing some cast iron cooking. We typically don't entertain in the wintertime.
How has the response to your book been?
It's been pretty good, actually. Of course, I'm not on the bestseller list, so that's always the preferable thing. But I think it's done. I think it's done fairly well. It's gotten a lot of good press. I have a lot of friends in journalism, so.
Do people reach out to you having read the book, and what kinds of things do they reach out about?
Well, a lot of people have reached out and told me how helpful it was, especially reading not just my story, but everybody else's story. And people, they ask me all kinds of questions on the Facebook page, like, could I recommend a builder, which is really localized. And I think, unfortunately, some people are running into the problem of, because the tiny house movement has become so popular that, and so many builders have cropped up. I think some people are running into the problem of running into unscrupulous builders. And so I try to help them, try to give them some tips on, check with your Better Business Bureau, make sure you see their portfolio, make sure that they are established, and talk to some other customers, get some referrals from them. Don't just go with any, guy that decided last night that he was going to put up a website on the web and become a tiny house builder. Because I did read a terrible story in one of the forums the other day about a person who had given up her life savings, which is another tip. Don't ever, ever pay them up front. They might ask for a quarter or whatever as a deposit, but don't ever give them all your money up front. But she gave him $35,000 and he disappeared off the face of the earth. So, people ask questions like that. They ask, of course, we're not on wheels. So a lot of people are building on wheels. And so they have questions about composting toilets and how to keep their pipes from freezing in the wintertime and things like that. We don't have that problem because we're on a foundation. So.
Interesting. What other kinds of things do you find you end up communicating that really help people?
Well, I think that, a lot of people are just kind of looking for community, and they can find that on our Facebook page. So they're looking for other people that have gone tiny. Really, my page is about inspiring people. So we show pictures of tiny homes, typically tiny cabins, because that's what my people like. They dream about living in a tiny cabin out in the woods. And so I think that, just inspiring people and telling people that they can achieve their dreams. My husband and I really, when we decided to move down here, we weren't thinking about doing it until we retired. And then my mom got sick. She had COPD, and we knew her health was failing in 2006. And she was originally going to move down here with us. And so I told her, let's move next year, which meant 2007, and get down there so she could spend some time down here. And unfortunately, she didn't make it. She got very sick in the winter of 2007 and passed away from bacterial pneumonia. And so I told my husband, I said, his job was starting to be in doubt. The founder of the company had some health problems of his own and was thinking of selling the company. And so we figured once the company sold that his job would probably be eliminated, and it eventually was. And so I said, there's no time like the present. We were only in our 40s, and I'm glad we didn't wait to do it until we retired. So I try to encourage people to, get to a place that they think that they can do it if this is what they want to do, to get to that place as quickly as possible. And, don't wait until retirement or whatever. And, I think I was taught that because my dad passed away when I was 17. Like I said, I was a midlife child. So he was in his late 50s when he passed away. And he was 8 months away from retirement. And so I think back on all the things that him and my mom used to say that they were going to do. They're going to travel. They're going to, start their own business. They're going to do this and do that. And, they didn't make it. And they didn't make it to that day. So we're never guaranteed tomorrow. And so I try to encourage people to get it done as quickly as possible and live your life. Live large.
Nice. Live large by living small. And what do you tell people about the cost?
Oh, the costs are, you can save phenomenally. Dale and I, my husband Dale, and I didn't have a big house in Kansas City. It was only 1,100 square feet, but it had 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and that great big country kitchen that we didn't use, a formal living room and a family room. And so here's all the space that we had to heat and cool every year. Most of it that we weren't using. So we got down here, and I just about cried the first month we got our utility bill. I think our first utility bill down here was like $18. It's gone up somewhat since. And we also lived in a very high tax rate county up in Kansas City. And so we were paying $2,000 or $3,000 a year. I can't remember. Well, I think it was just $2,000 a year in real estate taxes, plus the taxes that we had to pay on our vehicles and boat and everything else that we had registered up there. And so we get down here, and we have a homesteader's credit on our taxes because we built from the ground up, and which you can find in many states if you buy land. And our tax bill, our total tax bill with our homesteader's credit for our house, our land, our vehicles, our boat, the trailer, the four-wheeler, everything is $367 a year. So you not only save on utilities and mortgage payment and insurance. Your insurance will be cheaper, of course, because you're not insuring a great big, multi-$100,000 home. But you save on things like that, like property taxes and things that you don't normally think about.
And what do you tell people about what it's really going to cost to build a tiny house?
Well, usually it's more per square foot, because, what people don't realize is if you're building a 4,000 square foot house, you're still going to need a bathroom, and you're going to need a kitchen. And that's where most of your cost comes in. So if you want a nice kitchen and you want a halfway decent bathroom, and we have a full-size bathroom as well with a tub and shower combo, you're still going to have that kind of expense and plumbing expenses. So yeah, it might be more per square foot, but you're cramming more life into per square foot is what I tell them, really, because we don't have one extra bedroom. And I say one extra bedroom because we had a 3-bedroom house in Kansas City. One of them was my office. We don't have a formal living room that we're not using. We don't have all that space in the kitchen that we really didn't need because we didn't entertain. We didn't have great big family functions. Most of our family had bigger houses than we did anyway. So, it might be more per square foot, but you're cramming more life into that square footage.
I kind of love that as a stopping place. Is there anything else important to communicate to people who are watching?
Well, I think that as far as living in your kitchen or, doing your cooking in your kitchen and things like that, I would encourage people to do what I did if they're intimidated by their kitchen or intimidated by cooking. And I personally chose as a healthier lifestyle to go plant-based. So the percentage of my diet is plant-based diet. I don't eat a whole lot of meat. My husband still does, but I don't. And so whatever you decide to do, get yourself out there and take some cooking classes. I took some plant-based cooking classes, which were really fun and gave me an opportunity to meet some other people. And don't be intimidated in the kitchen by your tiny kitchen, because, everything is within reach. You don't have to run from end to end or, be digging around in cabinets that you haven't looked in for 15 years for stuff that you might use. And then also my book, Living Large in Our Little House, has a whole chapter of on your kitchen, as well as everything else. But the chapter on the kitchen includes, the basics of what you need to take with you, the things that you need in the kitchen as far as spices and your cookware and your cooking utensils, and also encourages people, because I think one thing that intimidates people about going tiny is, giving up heirlooms. Our lives are built around, it's built around so much around food. If you think of a good family memory, most of your good family memories are around the Christmas table or the Thanksgiving table, or, a big, some type of a big holiday meal, birthday parties, birthday dinners, things like that. And so, and with those memories come, your mother's good wedding china, or, things that are heirlooms that you don't want to get rid of. And when I was interviewing people for my book, most of them said, or, at least a couple of them said that giving up some of those items was painful. It's actually a painful process. And it is. It's like anything else that you're purging to go tiny. But again, choose things that you love. I have not yet parted with my mom's wedding china. It's still boxed up in one of our 4 buildings in boxes. I haven't been able to part with it yet. One of these days I probably will either part with it or decide to use it. But I have, a bowl that was my grandmother's. I have my mom's little vinegar pitcher, and I have a couple of things that my great aunt made because she did wonderful, wonderful ceramics. And so you just choose things that you love, and so you can bring the memories with you. The rest of it you take pictures of, and keep it with the rest of the stuff keep it with the rest of the pictures that you've had to take photos of when you went tiny. So.
Terrific. Thanks, Kerri.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate it. And good luck with the summit.
Thanks. It's been a lot of fun so far. We've got a lot more fun coming up.
Great.
Fivecoat.
Great.
And
I look forward to it.
Large in our little house. Okay. Take care.
Okay.
Bye
you
now.
too. Bye-bye.